Welcome to the Circle of Birth podcast. I'm your host and advocate, Ali Kranz. These podcasts are here to gather stories, people and information to better our understanding of the wisdom of birth and how we can reclaim our connections to birth from conception and beyond. You will hear stories not only from Australia but from all over the world, bringing together women, partners, midwives, doulas and all the people that have a birth story to share. So jump right in for this next Circle of Birth story. So this podcast, we are welcoming Debbie and Melissa, and we are going to explore birth and healing. I am fortunate that these two women shared with me an insight into their own birth experiences and the journey of their network, Birth Talk, and recently published book, How to Heal a Bad Birth, Making Sense, Making Peace, and Moving On. I was moved in so many aspects from spending time with Debbie and Melissa. It brought up a lot of feelings for me from my first birth and the healing journey that I've come from and overcome too. So there's so much of this podcast that just sat with me. I have the book and I'm really keen to get into it. And as a lot of you know, in retrospect, I'm sure if I had access to this material years ago, I probably could have made sense quicker of what my feelings were. The feelings we have are real, and Debbie and Melissa have created a great avenue for us to acknowledge, accept, and as the title says, move on to either your life or your bonding with your children or your subsequent births. There's so much in this book that can help. So this podcast today will talk about an unplanned and the caesarean birth, long labour too, and however I won't say this is not going to be a trigger if you're just about to birth. So remember, we talk about empowerment here, and this is what this podcast is all about. So for those first-time mamas and partners out there, this podcast is great to listen to remind you to solidify your support networks and inform yourselves leading up to your birth so you can have a great first birth and be prepared for whatever the outcome may be. So for those who have had that difficult birth experience too, this is it. You will hear firsthand on how you can find the path to healing and acceptance. And just listening to these stories from Debbie and Melissa, and it's never ever too late to begin. So you will listen to these stories that resulted in empowerment by these women and went on to have more amazing birth experiences. And of course they formed Birth Talk and this amazing book, How to Heal a Bad Birth. I was just enjoying after listening to these two motivational and optimistic women speak, and you will hear their connection to each other is real. And from that, they've made a huge difference to so many lives already. So please enjoy. Okay, welcome to the Circle of Birth, Debbie and Melissa. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and share your stories, and especially the work that you both have produced and what you're doing now. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
So what we'll do is we'll start off if you want to describe both your stories together and how that led you into Birth Talk and the book that I've got in my hot little hands here, How to Heal a Bad Birth. And if you just want to describe your first birth and that journey, and that'll be great for us.
Sure. This is Debbie. So I guess my journey with birth literally started with my first birth, but we often say that we don't birth in a vacuum and we have a bit of a birth legacy. So I guess if I take that back, and looking at the pregnancy and even before that, I came from a birth legacy of being born by caesarean, and my mother had two caesareans, so there was that little bit growing up, that little bit of, I guess, doubt about birthing. There was really very little exposure to birth, which is very similar to most women. I'd never seen anything birth. And even when I was working as a nurse, I had never seen birth. And, at that point I was at quite a different stage. And as a nurse, I was very good at managing pain for people who were injured or ill. and I was very comfortable with surgery, and my perception was that I had a fairly good pain threshold with chronic pain, but not so good with acute pain. And so there was that culture that we have where there was this fear of this unknown thing that was birth. So I was actually actually a lot more comfortable with the idea of cesarean birth at some level. I used to joke that maybe I'd have an elective cesarean under a general because I probably wouldn't, hack it. And I didn't feel the need to prove anything, so to speak, as some people say. And that's kind of where my headspace was, which was totally based on fear, not on any information. But there was this little seed deep within me, which I know now was, due to a fair bit of gifts from birth and a little bit of instinctive seed, that maybe there was something more to it than that. So then jumping ahead, I went and did midwifery then, and that's when I first got to witness birth and all sorts of births, and just saw how different they could be, and I just saw how amazing they could be, and the power and the strength, and in all sorts of different births as well. And that's when I first was like, I want to experience that. So that was a really new thing for me, and I'm really grateful for that, because most women don't get that experience of feeling comfortable with birth and actually wanting to birth. And so then I got to the stage where I wanted to have babies, and I was trying to conceive, and after about a year of not conceiving, found out that I wasn't ovulating. And then I actually had that was very shocking to me. I think as women, a lot of us just expect that we will have families, and all of a sudden this whole life that I imagined was in question. And there was a lot of grief over that. And then I came to the idea that I could adopt, even though I know that's incredibly challenging and a whole different path. But there was also grief over, what if I can never birth? And to me, that was such a foreign concept from where I would have been 5 years earlier. I was grieving that idea. And so I went into my birth really excited about the opportunity to birth, and really excited about getting a chance to feel the power and the strength and the amazingness that I'd seen other women feel, and just regular women, not because they had any special abilities, but because of what happened to their bodies during birth, and because of how their bodies were supported in birth. So yes, I fell pregnant, and so that was the first, step one. I miscarried that pregnancy, and went through this with that miscarriage. My hormones, and the reason I'm going here is because there's a really wide range of normal, and not everybody's textbook. But my hormonal levels were all a bit confusing, and was I pregnant, wasn't I pregnant? Anyway, and finally the pregnancy looked like it was going to stay. And so after that miscarriage, I also had a very big shift in my mind in terms of, I trusted birth. I was happy to do the process. I was very excited about it all, but I couldn't ultimately control the exact outcome or the path it would take. And so I very much was saying, if you would like to stay, you're very welcome. We would like you to stay. We're ready for you. Throughout my pregnancy, just to take that feeling that I needed to fix it or make it work, and just go, you know what, you can only do the best you can, and some things are beyond your control. But in saying that, I also, having worked in the system, was acutely aware that didn't mean I just wanted to let go of all control. I just wanted to go with the flow of my body, and to support my body as best as I could to have the best experience. And I was also aware that I needed to be quite strong in that, because I'd been in a system where I'd seen that just being taken down a different path often. So anyway, so that was, I guess, the
lead up.
That's the not in a vacuum. So I got to this birth, and I decided that I really knew that I would be vulnerable, And I really knew that I just needed to be able to focus on birthing, and I really knew that I needed to feel safe and supported. And so
Sorry to interrupt. Did you work to a point, up to a certain point in your pregnancy?
Yes.
Yeah. So how did you go? I know you're just describing before. So did you sort of have this challenge with being midwife Deb and mother Deb, like you said, letting go and allowing your body to do its thing, but also sort of understanding the system and the processes?
In labour, do you mean, like in the birth itself? Do you mean?
Yeah, so coming into the birth and heading into it and your outlook.
I guess I became a little bit very diligent about what I thought might be the challenges in birth, and really trying to make sure that the support people around me really knew about what things might be helpful to be said, what things will be about how I wanted to be involved in decision making. So I spent a lot of energy antenatally setting that up so that I sort of viewed it a bit like, you know, when I planned my wedding, that I did a lot of work before the day, but on the day I wanted to be able to let all of that go and know that the people around me knew what I wanted. So
what about that clash between you as a midwife and you as a birthing woman?
No, I think I distinctly said to my carers, just please assume that I know nothing. Just talk to me like anybody else. And because I didn't want to, I was a little bit aware of, I don't want to just agree with you because I probably should know that, even if I'm feeling like I don't know that. So I just said, no, I'm just going to ask questions about everything and just treat me like any, like any birthing woman. But at the same time, I knew that I had, I guess, a distinct advantage, and I was very, very grateful and felt blessed for that over a lot of women in terms of what things were probably going to be helpful for me and what things weren't. Not as well as I know now, or the reasons why, but when you're in birth with women, it's there's certain things you can distinctly feel that are helpful and not helpful. So
you knew how to set up your environment.
So I chose continuity of care. I went through a birth centre and I had a midwife that I got to know. I probably had slightly longer sessions with her than the average person. Just talking to her and really, I really wanted her to know me, and I really wanted to feel that anything I thought was important, that she knew about that before. So I would ask for it, or please make sure I'm comfortable, and pop a towel on my knees if I've got tile marks, through to positive things for myself, like this is safe pain, it's working pain, or breathe down to your baby, just different things that, and things that I thought they could say, like, you are doing it, rather than, if I felt like I couldn't do it, saying you are doing it, rather than you can do it, because then I might get angry and say, how do you know? So I was fairly, I guess, directive in that way, because I just really wanted them not to feel to feel really prepared and really supported and really empowered, and also that I felt that I didn't need to come and tend to myself or make sure anything happened. I just wanted to let go of everything and trust those people around me. So
her support people were really beautifully supported by Deb in the lead up, which meant that during the birth then they didn't feel helpless, did they? They felt really empowered to be, that their role was really valued. Yeah.
Even things like when we go in, please keep the stimulation low, or let me have a shower, or just giving them ideas on what might be helpful, supporting any birthing woman, but it just happened to be me. So I got to the end of my pregnancy. I was getting towards 42 weeks, which is considered the end of term, and I was facing that I'd probably, if I didn't have my baby by 42 weeks, I wouldn't be able to birth in the birth centre anymore with my midwife. That was their policy. I'd have to transfer, and she was my only support that really new birth. I need to get into labour. So we did all the raspberry leaf tea and curry and just walking stairs and all the rest of it. And eventually it was a Saturday. Monday was going to be the big 42 weeks, I think. And so I was like, I've got this weekend to get myself into labour, was where my headspace was. And I decided I would have some castor oil. And I was a little bit wary because I didn't want to have, explosive diarrhea around a birth suite.
And were you feeling stressed at that stage? Like over that weekend?
I was feeling a bit stressed, yeah. Well, yes and no. I wasn't feeling scared, like a lot of women are feeling scared because, they're told their babies might die and things. I knew that, not as much as I know now, but I knew that women can go post-dates and that, most of the time their babies and their placentas are just fine. But I was in a position I didn't want to be in. I didn't want to have to make those decisions. Yes. And I was, going, typical. But anyway.
I'm sure you didn't want to have to drink castor oil either.
Well, I drank it in some apricot nectar, so I was lucky again with that little bit of midwifery knowledge that makes it palatable. And that along with the other 50 things I've been doing to irritate my uterus or bowel or whatever has probably worked. And the fact that I was probably very close because my second child I went into labour with her with no pushing, and I think 12 days post. So I was pretty much probably going to do it in the next 24 hours anyway. Possibly, you can't know for sure, but anyhow. So it was early afternoon and started getting niggles and, that periody pain sort of stuff. And my sister was over and probably about 3 or so in the afternoon, I said, there's stuff happening. There's a little bit of rhythm happening and it's happening fairly, every 15 minutes or something. I'm getting a bit of a crampy type feeling and me into established labour sort of, where I'm going to keep dilating rather than just doing the early labour, which is getting the baby in position and getting the cervix shorter and all the rest of it. Anyway, so we went in and it turned out I was 5 centimetres dilated, so I had moved into that next stage on contractions that were seemingly not good enough to do that, but it was going to be a long, slow haul because, I wasn't having as many contractions and the baby was not in a great position. She was sitting quite high, and that's probably because I pushed her into the whole deal. And so it was just going to be a long, hard slog, and I was prepared for that. And so I laboured at the birth centre from, I think, about 7 a.m. all the way into the evening.
Were you in the pool? Or?
Yeah, I was mainly in the shower. I was in the shower a lot. I was over the birth ball. I was walking, tried to walk stairs and things to bring the head down. And eventually it just got to the point that I was just utterly exhausted because I'd just been on my feet the whole time. And eventually, so I hopped into the pool, and which was something that I hadn't, I'd never liked baths. I always liked showers, so I didn't think I'd liked a bath. And I hopped in there and I was like, oh my goodness, I can lay down. And I just lay. I could lay. That was the only place I could lay comfortably. And I'd still have to flip myself into my hands and knees for each surge, but that was much easier to do in water. And I had my husband behind me and I was just sleeping so solidly between surges and then they started, which was fine for a while, and then they just started getting further and further apart, and in the hospital setting, a lot of things is very much assessed on, that there's progress. It seems to be that it's going ahead, and this was sort of stopping, and so there was very much, well, we need to get this labour going, and so I was like, I was at a fairly fresh midwife, and was okay. In hindsight now, I think, and having been with many women who sometimes do get exhausted, I think if I'd been allowed to sleep a bit longer, that probably would have been the best thing for my body. But that wasn't an option, and my midwife was doing her best to already, reassure people, the medical team that I was still progressing, that there was no reason to put oxytocin or things like that. It was just a longer than average labour. And I just kept saying, am I okay? Yes. Is my baby okay? Yes. Well, then I'm fine to continue. And, it was epically, well, not epically, there's a lot of people who have much longer ones, but it was felt like a marathon. But I felt strong and amazing and awesome through it as well. I obviously had a whole bunch of lovely hormones helping me along the way, and I was just like, oh, this is hard, but I can keep going. I'm fine, and there was elements of really good stuff in there as well, and so I wasn't. I just felt exhausted. I felt like I was running a marathon, but I didn't feel like I couldn't do it or didn't want to be there or anything bad. It just felt like really hard work, but at the same time, I felt really. There's something fulfilling about doing something really hard work sometimes if you're feeling good otherwise. Anyhow, so eventually those contractions were about 12 minutes apart, and we decided, okay, maybe in the situation I was in where no one was going to just let me have a sleep for a few hours, maybe if we broke the waters, that would help her head come down a little bit more solidly onto the cervix, and that would help, because from my internal they were saying you're 8 centimetres and it's all very loose, but the baby's head needs to come down onto the cervix more. So again, you can hear that there was conversation. I was very much in the very central to making the decisions and talking about it and asking questions and going, right, okay. And so I made a decision of, okay, well, it seems, even though it's a bit high and there are some cord safety concerns you need to think about in that scenario, it seemed like it would be safe and okay to artificially rupture my membranes. And, well, actually, prior to that, I thought that I was a lot further along because I'd had this real pushy sensation. And I thought, woohoo, here I am. And it turns out it was my membranes and bulging on my pelvic floor. So it was like a head was there, same sort of feeling internally. So I had this real, pushy stage, and then we discovered that there was no head there. Anyway, so I hopped out of the bath. My midwife, went over to the mattress, I think, and she artificially broke my waters, and we'll think, okay, hopefully she comes down a bit and we'll just dilate, we'll be ready to go. And she did come down, but she came down into my pelvis, came right down posteriorly. She was posterior, and there was meconium in the water as well. And so we were like, oh, okay, so she could have meconium, she could have poo because she's 42 weeks and she's big enough to. She could have it because I've been taking castor oil and maybe that helped her to poo as well. Or she could have it because I've been having a long labour and maybe she's distressed. So we had to sort of check that out. And we were like, oh, great. She's posterior. This might take a bit longer again. Yeah. And I might need some really good contractions to help her turn on my pelvic floor. But anyway, so we went, oh, great. So that didn't quite fix, just take us into the next stage like we wanted. And so at that point, I had to transfer out of the birth centre to birth suite because that was the policy around meconium. And the meconium wasn't terribly thick, so we weren't worried about her breathing it in when she was born as such. It was more like, is she distressed? Is she handling this long labour that we kind of forced her into in a not a great position? So we went next door and I made the decision then. I just said, okay, well, they wanted to pop a CTG, so a continual monitor on me, and I was like, well, that's fair enough to track her for a little bit, put that on for 20 minutes, make sure she is okay. They sort of said, well, now your contractions are 15 minutes apart. You really need to get some good, strong contractions to turn her. And so I made a decision at that point to have some Syntocinon through a drip as well. And little did I know that it was probably 7 hours earlier that was being suggested at the doorway, but my midwife was saying, she's fine, baby's fine. And so I'm really glad about that, because I really got to have all these hormones, and my baby was really prepared to the fact that she was coming out, and I didn't have these interventions earlier, which might have meant that I had them longer with different side effects, or, so anyway, and it felt like the right time, basically. So we went next door, and I said, I wasn't allowed in the bath anymore because I had ruptured membranes meconium. We had to check on her, and I said, you're asking me to lay there with a CTG, with a Syntocinon drip. I don't believe I can't do that. I can't lay down. I think I'm going to choose to have an epidural. In hindsight, again, I think I probably would have tried it first, and then possibly still ended up choosing an epidural. But at the time, I was just like, that's impossible. You're taking away all my resources. You're taking away my ability to move. You're taking away my bath. You're taking away my freedom to just focus and be in my own space with my hormones. You're interfering with my hormones. So all my tools have been taken away. You expect me to still be able to run this marathon? I don't think I can. So I chose to have epidural along with the Syntocinon. We went next door. We did that, and I thought, okay, well, hopefully we can just whack this up for an hour or two. My contractions will pick up enough for her to turn and come down. I'll fully dilate, and we can turn it all off, and I can push this baby out. That was my next hope. And then, if that didn't work out, we would have dealt with the next thing. But we kept feeling like we were dealing with this and this and this. And so I transferred, and I had the epidural and the Syntocinon, and that was by far the hardest part of my labour, was having the epidural sited. It was just horrific, trying to sit when I couldn't sit, trying to keep still, and being terrified that they were going to damage my spine or something. Telling a woman to sit still while she's having an epidural is just pointless almost. I mean, you've got to sit as still as you can, but saying it in a way that, why aren't you sitting still, is just it's not fair, because and bend and push your back out, and I had this huge stomach. I was like, I am, I think, anyway. So that was by this point it was 29 hours or something, and that was by far the hardest part of the whole thing, was trying to sit still and go against my body rather than with it for that period of time. Once the epidural was in, I thought, okay, let's make the most of this. Let's try and get to sleep.
Did you get a sort of instant relief once it was in? Did you get a chance to just sort of have that lay back moment and a bit of a breath?
Yeah, it wasn't instant, but it was just like, the I guess it felt like, I was going to say, the intensity just dropped right back, but it wasn't like not instantaneously. It was sort of like running the marathon, and now I'm allowed to walk. and now I'm sitting down beside the path for a bit going, so it wasn't like it was all gone. It was just like, whoa, been working hard, literally sitting beside the path. I think catching my breath, and I and that's because I didn't need my focus then for everything for the labour, and so I said to my support people, order some food for yourself, get some pizza or something, because they'd been going for 29 hours. And that's Melissa is my sister-in-law, and I knew that since that morning, I think, or even since the night before, perhaps, I don't know, because I think since the morning. I went into labour the night before, but early that morning, 7 a.m, I went into the birth centre. And my parents lived out of town, as did my sister, and they were all at my brother's house, which at Melissa's house. And I knew they were all there. They'd been there all day. It was now like 10 o'clock at night, or 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, I think, something like that.
Pressure there.
And I was thinking, I hope they're okay, but but I was really, really thinking about Melissa, because Melissa, and I'll let her tell a little bit about that in a second. But Melissa's firstborn was 2 years older than this birth, and a lot of the things that had happened in terms of it was long and posterior baby and meconium, was it meconium? No meconium, but and transferring out of the birth center and having syntocin and having an epidural. A lot of the what happens were happening the same, but
so I could see when we kept getting these updates of what was happening with Deb, and I felt like I could just see my birth happening to her, and I was absolutely horrified.
Yeah, and I was imagining, because I knew that Melissa's birth had been really traumatic because of how she felt throughout it and because of the support she had and the different information and all sorts of different things. So hers had been incredibly traumatic, whereas mine, I was feeling like, well, yep, okay, I'm buggered, but this is empowering, this is amazing. And
she's suggesting them to order pizza. Yeah, that's how crazy she was.
And I said to my brother, I think I was talking to
my husband.
So to Melissa's husband, I said, because I was just thinking, oh, Melissa. This is going to, I didn't know the word trigger then, but I just thought, oh, she's just going to be sitting in the corner beside herself,
I was
thinking, oh my God, It's just going like mine. So I said to my brother, tell Melissa that I'm okay, that it's fine, that I'm okay, that it's going to be all right. And it's,
so we're both sitting here with tears in our eyes now because it was that big. It was just like, I'm thinking, no, it can't go like that for her, and she's thinking, oh no, Melissa's going to be thinking it's going like that for me. And so because Debbie had been at my birth and we both just knew where each other would be. Well, I didn't want her to be where I had been, and she knew what I was thinking, and she couldn't explain to me that it was different.
At that point
she could just say I'm okay, and I'm just then sobbing because I'm like, she's thinking about me and she's in her birth.
Oh, no. That's just, what a beautiful connection that you guys just showed there together. And just like you said, Deb's in labour, and just to have that thing, it's like, tell her I'm okay. And wow.
Yes, so it was definitely crossed my mind, and the epidural sitting on the side of the road gave me a moment to voice it. But so anyway, so I had then once they were all eating pizza and I had staff freaking out that there was pizza in the room and saying to me, "You're not eating pizza, are you?" And I was like, "Why?" I was thinking, "Oh, they all think I'm going for a cesarean." Well, I don't think I'm going for a cesarean just yet. I might, but it was the same what had been happening all day. The assuming that, because sometimes when it looks like this, it goes this way. Just going, well, let's just take it that way, and as opposed to let's just follow where it needs to go. And so I ate my nuts and little bits and pieces much too.
Did you want to eat pizza?
No.
That wasn't on
I just trail mix. No. I eat pizza, but I was like, I can if I want to. But at the same time, I was also going, okay, be sensible. The chances that you might have a cesarean are a lot higher now than they were. So just, But I was also like, you are also running a marathon and you need to keep yourself hydrated and have energy. So balance that out, be a bit sensible. Anyway, and so I slept then for a bit, which was awesome. And the only thing with the epidural, actually, I had this incredible pain in my left, I can't remember now, I think it was my left hip, or in one of my hips, and I can remember saying, is that normal? Is that normal? And being told that sometimes happens with an epidural. I was like, oh, okay. And, in hindsight, years later, when I had my next birth, I know that was when my baby was moving through my pelvis, and because I was laying flat on my back, it couldn't open as easily, and that's what that pain was. And whenever I have, being working as a birth worker, often you're in interesting positions with women, and I have lower back issues, and when they play up, it's always through that sacroiliac region, and I'm sometimes when it's really bad, I go, I can feel that it's exactly the same pain. So it was really interesting. It wasn't until years later that I went, so now if a woman tells me she's got pain, we just move her a bit. because I didn't have the cues in my body to tell me to move. I just knew I could feel something. But anyway, so an hour or so later, yes, I was fully dilated. The baby had come down. I was having, regular surges, probably every, they were 3 in 10 by that point with the drip. And so we were like, cool, this looks like it might work. This last step of the plan might actually come off.
Mm-hmm.
And so my midwife said, well, you can start pushing, and I didn't have an urge to push because I had an epidural. And even though I asked them to turn Syntocin and the epidural off at that point, hoping that sensation would come back quick enough for me to be able to feel more of it, but it probably didn't really. And so I can remember my midwife looking at me. Oh, I can remember some of the other staff, some of the other obstetric staff and midwives who'd come in saying, can you feel your contractions? Can you feel that urge to push? And I kind of told a little Furby, because I kind of said yes, and which is not, I think it's really important that you can have an honest relationship with your carer, but I just instinctively felt, and I know now that they were prepping me for Caesar, I instinctively felt that if I gave them that piece of information, that wasn't going to be a safe thing for me to do. It would lead somewhere I didn't want. So I said, yes, I could feel it, but then I looked at the midwife who I knew and shook my head, looked at her and said, no, I can't. So she just put her hand on my belly, and would feel the contractions, and she'd nod at me and I'd push. And because I'd had that feeling of those...
Do you mean she'd nod at
me, that let me know that I was having
a contraction?
Yeah. And because I'd had those probably 40 minutes earlier in the day with the membranes on my pelvic floor, I knew what that felt like and I knew where to push. So that was actually really helpful at that point. And we had a mirror so I could see, as she was coming closer, I could see that. And so that's how we did second stage with her telling me when I had good contraction and me pushing. And so my daughter eventually crowned, and I never forget that there was a paediatrician there too, because the meconium, and they were thinking, often the case if women don't get enough time and support, or sometimes it's needed as well because the epidural paralyzes the pelvic floor, the chance of an instrumental birth is going to be higher as well. So they usually have a paediatrician in there, and I pushed my baby out, and the paediatrician was all teary, and my midwife and I were kind of looking a little bit at each other, a bit confused as to why he was, it was nice, but really? Are you that moved? Okay. And he said, oh, it's been so long since I've seen a baby being pushed out. And I can remember that stuck with me, because I just thought so many women in this scenario, without the support I had, without the knowledge I had, would have felt that they would have, had intervention much earlier when it actually wasn't needed, So I thought, he's usually there and they're doing the intervention, and whereas we kept saying, no, we're fine, just give it a bit of time. And so Tay was born, which was amazing and awesome and wonderful, but I distinctly remember, and I didn't know why then, but she came up to my chest and, all goopy and lovely, and I looked at her and I was like, oh, she's so cute, and I've been wanting a baby for so long, but there was a little bit of it wasn't quite as euphoric as I thought it was going to be. It was a little bit, I guess, flatter than I thought it was going to be, and I was a bit shocked by that, to the point that I was like, oh, I think I have to think about how much I wanted her for me to feel this deep emotion. It was like, she's really cute, but it could have been me looking at your baby on your chest at birth. She didn't feel like this is instantaneously my baby, which was really interesting to me. And I now know it would have been because my hormones were interfered with, and from the epidural and the Syntocin and things like that. So I had been lucky in that I had 29 hours of really good hormones, which really helped me. But they were interrupted, and how much they get interrupted from one woman to another varies. But for me, the epidural and the Syntocin, because they fill up the receptors for your own natural hormones, because they're a synthetic form of them, your body starts reducing your own hormone production. And probably, realistically, me having 2 in 10 surgeries, my hormone production was probably interfered with. So that was really interesting, and it was a couple of days later that I felt that mother lion thing come in. But in hindsight now, I know why, and I would have done a lot of skin with her straight away, and
to try and
replicate those hormones, because there's lots of, even if if you're having an elective cesarean, you can still replicate a lot of those hormones very quickly if you know how to. So, but at that point I didn't know how to, and so it took a couple of days before that real mother lion connection kicked in. Whereas with my other daughter, where it wasn't like it was fireworks. It was just a non-issue. It was just like there was never a gap. It just was a continual thing, and I think that's so important, because even though it was so short-lived and the intervention was short, I still had that moment of, gee, I imagined I was going to be maternal my whole life. I wanted this so bad, but at that moment I didn't feel instantaneously maternal, and I thought that was a bit strange to me. And I think there's so many women out there who their hormones are being interfered with interventions or through it. They haven't felt, like, even if you're feeling scared or unsafe, it can interfere with your hormones. So from emotional reasons, their hormones have been interfered with, and they have this perception that they're not very maternal, or they have no maternal instinct, or they don't feel connected to their babies, and often they take that on as a personality thing rather than it's actually in response to what you've been through. It's a normal response with that bit of interference.
So it's a hormonal response.
It's a hormonal response, yeah. So then we transferred back next door into our birth centre and fed her, and so the whole labour I was very good with going with the flow and let's see what happens. But now and I think the miscarriage and with the pregnancy had really prepped me for that. But now I had my baby. I didn't need to worry about that. And I was a midwife, and I knew how to change nappies, and I knew how to breastfeed. I knew how to do all this. So now I was going to come into my own and just take over. And so I popped it. I was like, yes, demand feeding's good. And I popped her on my breast, and I did the nipple to chest and sides on and big Special K Kellogg's mouth, and on she went. And it hurt, and I was like, huh? It's not meant to hurt. Is it really meant to hurt? Have I just been lying to women? Does it just hurt? And I'm a big wuss. And so I had all these questions of myself, and I'd say to the midwives, can you check my attachment? And they'd say, oh, yeah, it's beautiful attachment. She's good mouth and, perfect. And I'm like, it hurts. And they're like, oh, maybe your nipples just need to toughen up a bit. Okay, all right. And so I went like this, and then I was like, she's feeding. I know you meant to demand feed, but she's feeding all the time, like all the time. And maybe if I, people would say, those, when people see you in hospital, they only see a glimpse of that, a snapshot of what's going on, and so they give you an idea for that snapshot, which might be different to the next snapshot someone sees. So all these little different things in my ears. And
do you mean from the midwife?
Yeah, just bits of information around breastfeeding and even the ones I'd heard over years as the midwife. And so I started thinking, maybe if I hold her out a little bit, that'll make sure, maybe she'll have a better feed, like if instead, like if I make her wait a bit, if, she's on the boob every hour, maybe she's not hungry, maybe I need to do something else, and in 2 hours I'll let her go to the boob. And anyway, so I started trying to fiddle with it a little bit, and went home, and day 3 discovered that she was dehydrated because she wasn't attaching right, and she was actually wedging my nipple, and we had all sorts of issues. And so I guess that lesson with my next birth very much said to me, you do what you need to do, kid. And I just let her get on in whatever position she wanted, which...
This is the second baby.
The second baby, which was such a... like she attached basically on her back of her head backwards. It was so bad looking, and no non-textbook, that the lactation consultant wanted to take photos to take it to a conference to say not all babies attach the same way. And she had to do that because of the shape of the palate of her mouth, the roof of her mouth. She needed to do that to be able to swallow and feed at the same time. And so with the first one, I tried to do what I thought was meant to be right. The second one, I went, I have no idea. You do what you need to do. And she figured it out. And so the first one, then we also had, all these other little, and the reason I'm saying this is because normal can be really varied. So we had the breastfeeding issues, then we had that my milk didn't seem to come in, like it just, where's this milk coming in business? Okay, well, it's there somewhat. It must have come in, but it wasn't obvious. And then we had probably 2 weeks, I think, I had the lochia that you lose was a lot heavier than usual. And I thought, oh, that's not textbook. Maybe I should mention it. And there was I didn't have a fever. I didn't have pain or anything. Anyway, I mentioned it, and next thing I was having an ultrasound, and next thing we believe there was retained products, even though my placenta looked like it was complete when it came out. And then I was off for surgery for a D&C to get my retained placenta, so to speak. And so I was trying to deal who was having problems whilst being in bed with drips and antibiotics and getting thrush and all these sorts of things. And I also had a baby who had severe colic and reflux. And through all of this, it was just so challenging and so hard, but I can just remember thinking so many times, I'm so glad that I had a good birth. Because even though it was so long, I felt after that birth, I felt like I can do anything. If I can do, I feel so strong, I feel so powerful, I feel like that I run a marathon that I never even had to train for. I just feel extraordinarily strong. I'm so much stronger than my husband and everyone around me. I was like, I'm friggin' Wonder Woman. And that was so powerful in that postnatal experience because it was just so hard. And
that, can I just say that was really shocking to me, like in a good way, because I came to visit Deb in the hospital the day after her baby was born, and I came in so nervously, like tiptoeing in, not knowing what I was going to find, thinking that I was going to find her like how I'd been, like basically a sobbing mess on the bed and sort of falling apart. And
well, you weren't like that. That's how you were feeling.
That's how I was feeling.
But that's not how you presented.
That's not how I presented.
Yeah.
No, she's right. And so I came in and I can remember just feeling like I was clutching at my heart. It just felt like, what am I going to find? How is she going to be? And she was just okay. She was just, I think, sitting up in bed and giving directions to people because there was lots of, she had lots of support in there and just, running the show. She was just really confident and happy, and I've just had a baby and wow, and look at that. And I'm just like, you're kidding me. This is how it can be. Oh, my God. Oh. And I was so relieved, and I came out and I cried all the way home because I was just so happy for her and so relieved. And I think her dad was looking after my little boy at home, and I got home and, took him and had a cuddle with him and then just went into the toilet and just sobbed because I was just so relieved. So anyway, back to you.
And and then so I had that surgery, and then 2 weeks later I got a urine infection from it, so I went back in really, really, really sick and had to have more surgery, and that basically was the last nail in the coffin for my daughter's breastfeeding. So I had to grieve that over time. But interestingly, the next birth, I also had the same issue with the loss going on for a long time, and I started panicking and going, oh no. Even though I thought maybe that's just normal for me, but when it happened again, it brought it all back. So I totally, understand that idea that things trigger.
Yeah.
But I had a wonderful midwife who said, let's just watch your temperature, just watch what you do. This could be normal for you. And it just resolved itself on its own. And the breastfeeding, as I said, the attachment, she attached how she wanted to attach. She fed for 16 hours out of 24 hours.
This is the second baby.
The second baby. So this is the baby I decided not to say you're feeding too much. I just let her do what she needed to do. And with 16 hours out of 24 hours, which obviously meant I needed really good support around me, so I could basically just sit there with her feeding, sleeping, sit awake, whatever. And it still took day 7 for my milk to come in, which is, I think I've come across one other person in that scenario, which is really, really unusual. And so basically I needed every bit of hormonal help and every bit of support, and all the stars aligned for those things to happen. And I was like, well, I can see why my mother thought she could never breastfeed. But it happened, and I breastfed my child into toddlerhood, and I breastfed her exclusively until 9 months or something, 10 months, because she had some allergy signs and things. And so, again, I'm certain neither of my labours have been textbook at all. Neither of my postnatal periods have been textbook. But the body's so well designed. Usually, that question, could this be normal for me, is so important, because it's such a wide range of normal. And I guess then the second thing that came out of that birth was that I knew before I birthed, I knew birth could be amazing and powerful and wonderful, and I'd seen it. I also knew that a lot of women weren't experiencing it that way. But my birth told me, you know what? It doesn't have to be a certain type of birth. That birth had lots of challenges, and it wasn't textbook, and there was interventions, and it still launched me into motherhood feeling incredibly confident and positive, and it was such a gift for what came. And I thought, oh, thank goodness, because I don't know how I would cope, or how women cope, and women don't cope, going into motherhood without feeling that positivity and without feeling that confidence, with actually feeling the exact opposite, feeling really quite, that they've failed, or lacking confidence, or any of those things. And so that birth really said to me, this is important, not just for the day, but this is as important because it helps you go into motherhood. And imagine doing that from a bad start. Yeah. And any birth can be a really good birth, can have positive aspects to it. So, so I guess, and that's what, and I'll let Melissa talk a little bit in a second, but that's what led me into Birth Talk, just wanting to make birth better and wanting to support women who didn't have great births, to be able to heal from that, and to say, I understand that it's hugely important. You were hugely vulnerable, and anybody feeling like you did during that time, that's going to have an impact, and that's not how it's meant to be, I guess. Yeah. And there's more, but I'm just going to head over to Melissa, because Melissa's...
I'll see if Ali had anything more. Did you have anything more you wanted to say to Deb?
Yes. So, Deb, how long after your first birth was your second pregnancy?
22 months. I'm just laughing.
22 months, yeah.
The conception of the first birth was challenging. The second one, not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And did you get, just going right back to after she was born for your first birth, did you have a period, just noting like you had the 30-hour labour and, all the things that sort of led up to it and what happened and how you felt, and did you have a good sleep after that?
Well, no, because I had a screaming baby.
Yeah.
I had a baby that was hungry, who had pain in her head because her head had been squished in a really bad position, and every time she was trying to attach, it was causing pain in her head. I didn't know this at the time. I found that out afterwards. and who wanted to feed all the time. And I can remember literally on day, I don't know, whatever it was, in the first week somewhere, in my spare bedroom, jumping like those African tribes, just literally 2 feet off the ground, because it was the only thing that settled her. And my mother-in-law and my mother and my husband were all flat out asleep, saying, we can't do it anymore, we're exhausted. And I was jumping and thinking,
she's the one who's had the baby.
I can remember thinking, thank God I can do it, because no one else can, so I didn't get to have a sleep for a very long time. I think when I got hospitalised at the month, when she was a month old and was really sick, maybe then I slept a bit, but hospital beds aren't so comfortable.
It's pretty tough.
And to the point that when I found out I was pregnant with my second one, when my first one was 1, and I was like, I want to do birth again, but oh my God, the postnatal period, and I was in tears. I was thinking, I can't. I've got a baby. I can't do that with another baby if it's the same. I was just so upset at the time, thinking, I don't know if I can do it. And I was just like, well, I just have to. And it will probably be different. And then my second baby was, she came on her own terms. She was in a good position. It was a much shorter labour. There was no interference with the hormones. And as you heard with the postnatal period, I let her do whatever she needed to do. And she was the easiest baby in history. She was just delightful. I was just like, oh, thank God. So, yes. No, I didn't get to have a sleep after my 30 hours. But because of the hormones, I didn't need to. I was okay. I was exhausted, but I was okay. Because a lot of the hormones, I had that interference for a short period with the drug interventions, but then I was feeding and so 4 out of the 5 hormones come back up during feeding. So I think my body just kept going, right, keep going. Yeah. So the birth lasted a few months, I think.
Well, thank you for that. Just your optimism just shined in that story too, and I think the thing I got from it was the support, I suppose, that you set up. And coming
and the
from
information, that I had seen birth, and so many women, that's why really good information, really good support for women is so important for them to have good births.
Yeah.
So there you find part 1. And so what I've done is I've split this podcast up into 2, and stay tuned. With the next episode, you'll hear part 2, and you'll hear a bit more from Mel and her birth experiences, and definitely the journeys. And we'll talk more on the book that they've just released, How to Heal a Bad Birth. Such good content. So sit tight and stay tuned for part 2, episode 8. Did you connect with this episode? Then head over to our website, circleofbirth.com. There you'll find show notes, pictures, resources, and potentially connect with today's storyteller. Don't forget to sign up to be updated with new empowering